Hello, dear listeners and dear viewers, and welcome to the unseen process of recruiting, where you find out what happens after you click submit. Now, we're in part two of our episode, right, with our dear distinguished guest, Brian Maguire. Before I get to Brian, let me introduce my dear co host, Greg Eidlen. Greg, welcome.
Hey, Michelle. Happy Thanksgiving Eve.
Same to you. Same to you and your family, Greg. And welcome
Thank you.
back, Brian.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Excited to be here.
It's great to have you over there in Wisconsin. A lot of stuff happening in Wisconsin, but we'll stick to recruiting for today. We talked about agency versus corporate recruiting last week. Let's build on that, right? And just talk about the topics around it. Let's just refresh everyone's memory though. Why did we decide to talk about this, Greg?
Because I think it's really important for job seekers to understand the different approaches on applying for a job. I think it's important for them to realize there's different angles of getting a new position. And I think they should just be educated in all angles and all paths to a position.
I agree. Brian, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Greg's absolutely right. As a job seeker, you need to know what role the recruiter is playing throughout your interview process, or even before you get to an interview, I guess.
That's exactly right. So the goal here is to educate you, the viewer, you, the listener, on what to know when you submit and after you click submit. Let's go straight to myths, right? Let's dispel some of these misconceptions about what agencies do. Greg, what's your first topic? What's your first item?
Sure. I think sometimes the biggest feedback or the most frequent feedback I hear being on the agency side is sometimes candidates are hesitant to work with us because they feel like we hurt their chances of getting a position. And that's a question I'm probably going to flip on Brian, since he's worked as recruiting for companies. Did you look at resumes any differently when they came from a recruiting firm?
No, I think typically when an organization engages an agency, it's because they don't have the resumes coming in to them for the role, or they want to have someone who's an expert at sourcing and searching facilitate the job search. So typically I apologize. Typically, the organization they want to work with an agency to facilitate the job search.
No, I get what you're saying.
It's a Friday for us.
It's okay. No, I get it, Brian. Basically, what you're saying is that someone's got to do the work, and in most cases, the corporation, the company, the client will seek the aid and assistance of an agency to do the work. Right, Greg?
Yep. If they're engaging us for a reason. It's because they understand that they need assistance finding that role in most cases. Now, of course, there's always going to be the outlying instances, but they're fully aware of the terms of what it takes to get a candidate through us. So yeah, I always say this to a candidate: wouldn't be reaching out to you if the client wasn't willing to take someone from us.
Fair enough. Next myth.
Next myth. Let's see what's another good one that I always hear in the marketplace. One would be that we affect their salary on offer. Because if a company has to pay a firm, they're going to take it from the candidate's salary request, which primarily is not true because they're different budgets.
Please go into that, and then we'll hear Brian's perspective as he has been in-house.
Sure. A lot of times when a company is utilizing a firm, it's coming out of their business to business or vendor budget, whereas salary and wages is a different budget on the books. So we really have no effect on someone's salary. A lot of the times using an agency will help someone because we know the market and we know how to educate them on what they should be looking for, and we could act as that buffer and help the negotiation process. A lot of the times, if a company is making an offer directly to a candidate, they may counter at the wrong amount, or they may get turned off by the initial offer and not even be open to discussions. Whereas we could sit in the middle and say to our client, hey, maybe you have to offer them this to get it. We have that relationship, so we know what it's going to take to get the person to happily enter with the company and not just accept an offer. But we'd love to hear Brian's perspective.
Yes, inside information is key here.
I totally agree with Greg on that. I think that when dealing directly with a corporate recruiter, a candidate or a job seeker has a little less leverage than they might when they deal with an agency recruiter, because that agency recruiter can give them a little more insight and typically is more willing to share salary insights and market insights. I think typically, and I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I think typically a corporate recruiter is trying to save the organization as much as they can when negotiating salary, whereas an agency recruiter probably is going to fight for your top dollar.
Okay. And to be fair, these are opinions, right? Dear audience, these are the thoughts that we're giving you from the perspective of context, from experience, right? Determine what best is applicable for you and then apply it, right? So that's a little disclaimer here. Brian's.
Well, I'm going to jump in on Brian's comment. Coming from, it's funny because Brian mentions, the agency is probably going to fight for the top dollar. And I think that comes from the mindset of working for a company internally. A lot of the times they'll look at it and they'll say the agency is going for the top dollar, whereas I'm not going to say we go for the top dollar. We're going for the long term. We're going for what's going to keep that candidate happy from the start, which, at times may mean a higher compensation because you're starting out on the right foot, whether it's a $2,000 or $3,000 difference in salary. We're going to prevent the low ball. We're going to prevent that minimum number sometimes where the candidate's not going to be happy. And we know in 6 months they're going to be looking, we're just rework in the same position. So our goal is to ensure everyone's starting out on the right foot, and in a way we're facilitating that process.
Awesome.
Sure. And when I said top, I guess when I said top dollar, I meant the candidates, worth, not the top end of the salary range for a role.
It's yeah, I got it.
Okay.
wanted to make sure we had clarification for that one.
Thank you both. Next myth I have here is beating the ATS.
Sure. That one I'm going to field over to Brian because that's not really a myth or a term I hear often. So that was one of Brian's brainchildren.
Yeah, I see that a lot on LinkedIn chatter. A lot of, write a resume to beat the ATS. And I think what is key as an applicant or as a job seeker is apply to a job that you're qualified to apply to and highlight your skill set. But in my experience as a corporate recruiter, human eyes have always hit every resume that came through. And unless you're being asked qualifying questions when you apply that would disqualify you based on your answer to that question, human eyes are seeing the resumes that come through. So as long as you have a well-written resume and you're qualified for the job that you're applying to, someone at least looks at your resume.
And I would have to agree with that. Being on the agency side, there's ways to enhance or improve your resume and not beat the ATS per se. There's ways of spelling out terms on your resume so it does get picked up by different filters. There's ways of elaborating on skill sets so it is being picked up, but it's not beating the ATS. I mean, the ATS at the end of the day is nothing more than a pool of data for us. It's really important to realize talent acquisition is a function of human resources. So you always got to keep that human element in it. Being on the agency side, I think I get approached all day, especially being in operations for our firm. And a partner in it by different vendors all the time and looking at different things. And, you know, artificial intelligence will never beat out the human aspect. It just, no matter how much it learns, no matter how much artificial intelligence claims to have different tools in different ways, it doesn't take out that gut feeling, that emotional aspect, and it just doesn't have what the human will have on the other side of the desk. It's a great tool, but you still need a human.
Right. And there's no doubt about that. I think as a career coach, one of the aspects of the job search that we encourage, or that I encourage with my clients, is to make sure, which is exactly what you're saying from a different angle, is make sure that your experience reflects what's reflected on the resume clearly and concisely. Understanding that when that artificial intelligence ATS system will be picking out those keywords. So as long as it's clear and it's realistic, you'll be fine. All right, let's move on to success stories. Excuse me, case studies.
Sure.
Right. Let's look at it. Let's look at an example, a few examples, and talk about how its dynamic plays out.
Sure.
Greg?
Yeah, so I think the biggest point that we always try to emphasize for candidates and job seekers is the idea that a recruiter is there to help you. We're not there to hurt people. We're not there to lessen your chances. If anything, we're always there to improve chances. One of the biggest things we can do is we could tell the story beyond paper. And that's proven. That's with the success stories we'll tell. One of them is a role Brian and I were working on. And this is probably several roles, but just one that sticks out. This candidate was maybe a 4-month process. We presented this person to our client. You know, first shot was, oh, he looks great on paper. Interviewed, then they were on the fence because about certain skills that he didn't have, but they could be lateral and translated in. And we went to bat multiple times, and finally they did hire this person, and this person's been with the company and is doing really well. It's probably one of the best hires right now. So if this was from the corporate side, that story may not have been told. There may not have been that dynamic or that narrative of why this person really is a good role beyond what they're showing on paper. You know, what the personality is like, why they would be a fit for this organization.
Good point. That's a good point, Brian.
Yeah, and just to echo what Greg was saying, I think an advantage of working with a skilled agency recruiter, skilled agency recruiter, is that they get to know the candidates and they get to know the clients that they're serving, and they're better able to play matchmaker and say, hey, this candidate may not have direct experience within your industry, but their skills are very transferable. And this is why I think, this candidate is someone that you should talk to.
Okay.
Yeah. And to echo that, I mean, it's to his point. You could sit there and not only say why we think it's transferable, we could actually say we've seen it with other clients in similar situations where this has worked out for them. Another great success story a lot of the times is I sent a resume to one client and they got turned down, but I was able to soft market them or just reach out to another client and say, hey, I have a candidate with these type of skills that would probably be a great fit for your organization. Would you be interested? And oftentimes we get, hires for roles that weren't even out or existed. Another great example is sometimes the jumpy resume. That's probably one of the favorite terms I think we've always heard. This person's too jumpy. And I think it's a huge concern a lot of times for a candidate that has a lot of movement. I think before we go into that, I think it would be great for Brian to explain what could define a jumpy resume.
Totally. I think from a corporate recruiting perspective, a lot of times an in-house recruiter will be told to not consider a candidate that has had, and the number I usually hear is 3 roles within 5 years.
Okay.
And disqualify any candidate who has had more than 3 jobs in 5 years because that person is a job hopper. And to me, if you look, again, I think I mentioned this last time, if you look at my LinkedIn page or you looked at my resume, I've had a couple of short-term roles, and some of them have been contracts, and some of them, unfortunately, have been roles that just weren't the right fit. But to be able to have somebody on the agency side to tell that story and go beyond what's just on the paper is really important.
Okay.
I mean, that story was great for Brian to the point that we hired him. So we act on what we preach. Sometimes the job hopping is reasons to it. There's validity. I mean, I had a candidate a few months ago, had 3 jobs in 3 years, maybe even 4. And each one really was valid. One was a family business. He no longer spoke to his family. Another one was a company that folded. Another one, he wasn't getting paid. So he wound up getting hired. I was able to make that push to the company, and now they love this person. This person's doing really well. I was talking to a company yesterday, and like they even mentioned to me, this client really understood that sometimes job hopping happens. They had someone who was at a role for a really long time, and then the next 2 roles were short term. And like they said, sometimes people are just trying to find that first fit they had, that 10-year or 15-year role, and it may take 1 or 2 decisions to get there. So I always think there's a story to be heard, and that's the great thing about using an agency and developing that relationship with an agency, because they can convey that story, and it's not just going to be paper and someone on the other side, not someone on the other time that's stretched for resources to take the time to know each resume coming in.
This is fantastic. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Question for both of you, your thoughts on someone who's established a relationship with a recruiter, but then they're no longer at the company and they want to get back into, they want to apply for a job at a company for a position that they didn't get it. They want to now apply again, but they did it through the recruiter. What are your thoughts on the best next step?
So I think if someone's applying through an agency, and it's common, recruiting firms oftentimes have a high turnover industry. That's something that I'll acknowledge. But I think oftentimes recruiting firms usually have something in place when that recruiter leaves the agency to say, hey, reach out to so-and-so. And that book of business sometimes is handed over to another recruiter or account manager. I would actually say, fortunately for us, it's not an issue we encounter because we have next to 0 on turnover in our firm. So it's a lot of consistency. I think on the corporate side, Brian, I wouldn't even know, how does that work on the corporate side?
I think on the corporate side, if you've connected with the manager within your department, your desired department, it's certainly appropriate to say, hey, I know we spoke 3 months ago about this sales role, and it wasn't a fit for me at the time, but I saw it posted again. I'd like to reach out. I think that's completely appropriate. And that hiring manager may say, please go back and apply again through the ATS. But on the corporate side, I think it's totally appropriate if you've established a relationship with someone there to send an email or pick up the phone and make a call, because that might give you the push you need to get through the ATS.
I think it's distinguished. Yep.
That's fantastic. Well, any final thoughts before we close, gentlemen?
I think, I always love these conversations. I think it's always good to have the flow back and forth and bounce off different approaches and ideas. At the end of the day, we're all trying to be a resource for anyone listening and anyone watching. Our goal, again, is to help as much as possible and not hinder. So I think anything we say is just full honesty and transparency.
And we thank you for that, Greg and Brian. Brian, thank you so much for joining us for our second episode, part 2. We wish you a very happy Thanksgiving, and maybe you'll come back. Who knows?
Thank you.
Thank you for imparting us your knowledge.
I really like it, Brian. Great to have.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, dear listeners. Until next week.